This material is made available to you by or on behalf of the University of Melbourne under Section 113P of the Copyright Act 1968. It may be subject to copyright. For more information, visit the University Copyright website.
All right. So tonight's topic is on retirement village and aged care facilities. I guess on one hand, you might find it in terms of valuation methodology, it might be similar from subdivision, residential residual valuation methodology, but on the other hand, it is also quite connected with asset valuation, portfolio selections. Right. So for this topic, I guess one of the most suitable person, perhaps in this country, to talk about it will be Marcus. So Marcus is a partner at EY, specialized in aged care and retirement village, and along with a lot of other topics. So I will get him up to the floor.
Thanks very much. What I propose to do is to go through the health and aged care area. A lot of you that are doing the property course will think it's probably not relevant. It's probably one of the fastest growing and biggest areas in the property market. And when you look at the percentage of GDP and our ageing population, it's going to get bigger. And you're seeing a lot of institutional investors, private equity companies getting involved in this sector. So probably when I started out 20 years ago doing this, there was very few valuers and property consultants. Now everyone wants to get in. So you've got the M3s, the CBREs, the Cushman Wakefields, everyone trying to get a piece of this action, because with our demographics and the ageing profile, there is a huge demand coming for retirement villages and aged care. A couple of the key things that you've really got to understand, they are completely different. So if you get them confused, you'll get your value matrix and assessing value wrong, and you'll get sued. So a lot of the people that ring me to say, you know, I'm valuing a retirement village, and they're talking about regulation and licences, that's not the case. So if you're going to get involved in this sector, understand the terminology and what the legal ramifications are and what the requirements are for licences, etc. Because if you get them confused, you'll advise clients or you'll invest into a market that has got a high degree of diversification of it. So as I said, you've got to understand the key fundamentals. This is not like an office building and you work out the market rent and you capitalise the market rents. Very simple, in doing valuations like this. This is valuing businesses that are underlying assets. So the assets of what it does is, really what drives the value. So you've got to understand what it is that's driving the cash flows, and then the cash flows will drive what the value is. And a lot of people really get confused of what they're actually valuing. So in a retirement village, you might have land, you might have unsold units, but then you've got what's called a deferred management fee. And what a deferred management fee is, every time a person moves out of the retirement village, normally the operator gets 30% every time it rolls over. So you have to do an actuarial calculation of saying when you think that person's going to move over. So the cash flows for a retirement village might be like this. And with your instructions of what you're valuing, you've got to be very clear and articulate of what the client's asking you to value. So if you're valuing only the cash flow, i.e. the deferred management fee, you've got to clearly articulate that. If they're asking you what the vacant buildings are worth, you've got to do that. So a whole lot of people will try to camouflage what you're valuing so that you don't come up with the right answer. So that the higher they can get you to value something, the more money that the bank will lend you. So you've got to be really cautious as a valuer to make sure that you're valuing what's there and what the bank, so if Armageddon happens and one of these operators go broke, if you don't clearly state what you valued and the bank can't recover what they've lent, they'll sue you. So you've got to be very, very careful about it. Who's been into a retirement village? What do they look like?
Like a large building with lots of internal units, big corridors, pretty dark remote places.
So what sort of person goes into a retirement village? Yep.
Like they can take care of themselves, unlike the aged care patients.
100%.
Independent living.
So can you have all 25-year-olds there partying in a retirement village?
I would say about 55, 60.
State legislation is over 55s. And normally they're very active. So they're 3-bedroom, they're detached, and they want community facilities. They want a pool, they want a bowling green, they want a bus, they want everything to make sure. So they're very active people, but they want, the reason why they move in is, you know, for security, etc. So when I talk about this, you've got to actually understand where this is probably one of the most important slides. In the left-hand side is a retirement village. A user pays, unregulated. I can build a retirement village anywhere I want as long as I get scale. I don't need licences and the government doesn't fund me. It's a totally user pay. And there's two parts of it. Independent living units, you live independently, and service apartments is when you're sort of 80 years of age, you're getting frail, but you don't need nursing home care, that you'll actually be looking after yourself, but you'll have common kitchen facilities. Once you go over into the right-hand side, which is called residential aged care, it is totally government regulated, it looks like a hospital, and it gets funded on a regulated basis. Who's been into a nursing home? No one's been into a nursing home to see their grandparents. Normally, it's about 90 to 100 beds. It's in a single room. Average length of stay is 18 months and you're dead. So can't feed yourself, very inactive, dementia, all of those, so you need 24-hour service. The government funds about 85% of it. Who's seen news reports on the Royal Commission recently? It's on Channel 2 News all the time. The government want to make sure the quality of care is right because they fund it to billions of dollars a year. So inappropriate care, they get sanctioned. So when you're actually doing evaluation, you've got to be clear about what you're valuing it. On the left-hand side is a user pay, open market forces. On the right-hand side, government regulated, government funded, highly scrutinised, quality of care, looks like a hospital. Two totally different valuation methodologies. On the right-hand side, the government regulates how many licences are in a particular area. So when they do the regulation, you've got 100% occupancy, 95% occupancy. If you get 95% occupancy in your regulated market, are you happy or are you sad? Happy, because all you're doing is controlling cost. Because you know the government has put a limitation on licences. So if you go to Doncaster or wherever you go, you know that most of them are going to be 95% occupied. What's the key facet? Is about quality of care. If you stuff up the care, the government will come in and take your licences off you and you're buggered. So what does the government do? They come in and give unannounced audits. So the department will walk into your facility and say, all right, I want to see all your rosters, I want to see your care, I want to see your care plans, I want to see your patient plans. If you don't have all those plans and you get complaints, the government reserve the right to give you a sanction. If they give you a sanction and you can't rectify the sanction, you've got to close. Not happy. And I'll talk to you why that's the instance. As I said, one of the key things is value is, you guys look at just some demographics. If you're going to make a career of something, make sure you understand where the demand's going to come from. As I said, 20 years ago, there was very few of us that did valuations. Now everyone wants to get a piece of the action. Everyone wants to get into transactions. Everyone wants to get roll-up. So, we've got ISPT. All of the funds want to invest in this market. Because what other market sees those demographics and demand? What's the three things you never get away from? Tax, death, and ageing population. And the government's never going to provide a service or infrastructure to do that. So what they're going to do is incentivise the private sector. So all of the big companies, Cedar Woods, Lendlease, Stocklands, all of those guys, if you want to work for them, have a big exposure to this. If you work for the funds management areas, Macquarie Bank, UniSuper, or ISPT, they want to get a bit of this action. But this whole industry is about care, and you get the care right, and you get the momentum right, then it drives value. If you think it's bricks and mortar, and you build a Taj Mahal and they will come, they won't. So it's got to be an operational. So that's why in the valuation profession, you can do a whole lot of mortgage security valuations on little office buildings and get $2,000. I'll charge 10 to 15 grand. So I'll get 10 times the fees per job that I do for doing an aged care facility or a retirement village compared to what other values. So who likes making money? If you like making money, get into the more complex stuff in the growing markets. So you would have had lectures about retail. How's retail going? Who buys shopping centre? Who buys online? Shopping centre and retail is going south in a big way. So people are looking at where they're going to reinvest their money. So in a market that's got a whole lot of demographics like this, and you're just having a look at the ageing population that we've got, a whole lot of people are going to get really good returns as long as they get the care and the operations correct. This is just a quick slide to give you a bit of an overview of why people are getting it over 65. People over the age of 65 access medical services 4 times as much as what people under 55. So you can see that as you get older, your requirement for services, infrastructure, all of those things, significantly increase. Your barriers to entry are really high. Unless you've got licences or lots of land, you're not going to have any competitors. Regulatory framework in the form of nursing homes, the government pay you, usually in advance, every month in advance, and they control the licences. So you're getting fixed income, and as long as you can control your costs, you make a lot of money. Private health insurance is going up, was going up, it's going down now, and chronic illness, so that there's a higher degree of dementia that's coming into our ageing population, and the government fund the nursing homes to look after better. One of the key things of what the government is doing, broadly in a nursing home, it costs the government around $150 to $200 a day to keep a person in a nursing home. Staff, catering, medical people, all that sort of stuff. So what they've been trying to do in the last 4 or 5 years is to have what's called a home care package. So the government want to make sure that people stay at home as long as they can, because it might cost them $50 a day. So is the government happy or sad? They're saving $150 a day. So what they're trying to do is make people stay at home longer, and they'll actually get the nurses to go to people's house so they can stay there longer. So they're saving $150 a day by keeping your grandparents or people out of nursing homes. So that's where the market is going, and what now is happening is there's a whole lot of packages that if you live in a retirement village, the government want you to stay there as long as you can before you go into a nursing home, because it's cheaper for them. So that's why you've got the demographics and the demand of, you know, what's actually driving the outcome. Why invest in healthcare? So if you have a look at the ASX 200 versus the healthcare ASX, you guys have got a lot of money. What if you were looking back at 2012? Where would you have got your greatest return from? Healthcare. Your returns have almost tripled. So when you have a look at Mr ISPT and Mr Cbus and Mr Lendlease and Stockland, the reason why they want to get into that action is it's high yielding. So their conventional assets and return on investments are relatively low. So what you do is they want to get a part of that blue action. So you see any investment reports, market's getting bigger, returns are good, as long as you get the quality of care and the perception right, and you look after the individuals and focus on care, you make a lot of money. Get it wrong, it's a disaster. As I said before, people have choice. The banks love health and aged care because of the demographics. What else do they like? They like office buildings, because they know office buildings, low risk, low yielding, but they've got security. What don't they like? Don't like development. If you're a bank, would you lend to apartments at the moment? No apartments, so they're not lending to apartments. Are they lending to retail? No, because people's rents are, halving at the moment. So the banks want to lend money out, so they're fueling the market because they want to get into healthcare by the right operators, because it's high yielding and it's a good investment mechanism as long as they're going to the right individuals. So I've put down there some key points of what's happening to the healthcare and the home care area. The home care area is getting bigger, and what it is that in the old days, the provider used to have a home care package, and then they would provide it. In February 2017, the government changed it so it was a user pay, so that now the resident owns a package, so your parents will be assessed. They'll say, right, you've got a care package for $20,000 a year. You can spend it as you want on healthcare related uses. So now there's a whole lot of the packages that are controlled by individuals. So they can pick Batcare, Australian Unity, King Care, Mequicare, Uniting Agewell to provide those services to them. So the nurse will come daily, every second day. Podiatrist will come every day, every second day to look after you. A hell of a lot of money in that area, because the government is funding it so that people can stay at home longer. If I was a punter and wanted to get into this area, which a lot of the private equity companies are trying to do at the moment, there'll be a company, and I don't know what it will be called Uber Health. So what you'll do is your daughter will understand, or your son will understand, what their parents' package is. So if your mum needs a podiatrist, the daughter will hit a button and say, the podiatrist has got to be at my mum's house between 9:30 and 10:30 on Wednesday. Goes there. The mum will say, am I happy with that service or not? If I'm unhappy, I'll do like Uber, I'm unhappy. So then when the next person comes for a podiatrist, you can pick the person that you want. So the person that's got the technology and the digital that links the return to the person on their phone will dominate the market. So a whole lot of these companies are investing a hell of a lot of money on digital and logistics to say, right, if I've got a retirement village and I'm, say that there's a retirement village of 200 units and 50 people in that village has a community care package, if I've got a nurse going from one door to the next, to the next, to the next, I'm making a hell of a lot of money versus them driving 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, because you don't get paid for driving time. So that's where these companies are trying to get aggregation and technology where they can provide services and more services. So as I used before, that your mother gets $20,000, she's eligible for a podiatrist and nurse 3 times a week. Then up on your screen will say, oh, does your mum want her hair done? Extra $50. Hit the button. So what they'll do is be able to provide extra services to make an increased margin. So the daughter, the son, whoever it is that's in charge of the plans will be able to pick it. So if I was punting and you get it right, digital and digital technology will really dominate this market from what it's been historically. Because as I said, the government want to move away from retirement villages and nursing homes to keeping you in your house as long as you can stay. Retirement villages. This is what they look like. It's like living like in a hotel. So as an example, in the top left is an independent living unit. 3 bedrooms, your own bathroom, your own kitchen. You can do what you want. So if you don't want to talk to anyone, you can lock yourself in the house and you'll be self-sufficient. When your care gets a bit greater, so you don't actually have the ability of, cooking, etc., you'll move in something to the right or down to the right, where you'll have common dining facilities. So you won't have a kitchen, you'll have a small servery area in your room, so like Rylands, etc. But you'll go to common areas, and normally you'll be in the age of about 75 to about 85. So that's what a retirement village looks like. Pristine, great. Kids come, grandchildren come, there's pools, there's hairdressers, there's dining facilities, there's bowling greens, there's buses, they'll take you out to community centres and all that. You're very active. They're over 55, so you don't get young larrikins doing wheelies around party mode. You don't get, what's the ones of, where you have the people staying over, in the hotel overnights, where you book it, the party rooms and all that sort of stuff, over 55, and that's where it's limited. You can't get people under 55 there. A hell of a lot of community facilities. So you've got to say, if you're a retiree, what would you want? You'd want theatres, you want data rooms, you want pool tables, you want all of this stuff, because you guys retiring will require a lot more infrastructure than what I would. And it's evolved over time of what demands are. So when you're looking at the older retirement villages, you've got to say, do I have to rebuild the common areas because they don't meet the purpose of the current retiree? So they spend a lot of money on the community centres. As I said, there's 2 types of retirement villages. Independent living units, normally a 3-bedroom, 2-bedroom unit that's separated, or serviced apartments where you're still active, you can look after yourself, but you're in a square box. Normally it's 1 or 2 bedroom and you've got a bit of care, but you're still pretty good. As I said, these things have huge community facilities. Bowling clubs, pools, gyms, rec rooms, arts rooms, dance floors, bars, they have everything. Because it's a self-centred community, they don't usually go outside the retirement village. So all of that infrastructure has to be part of the retirement village. If you don't provide all that infrastructure, you won't get the occupancy. Don't expect them to walk around the street and go around the corner for the pool or the lawn. They're very selfish people and they want to integrate with their own communities and they want to have a similar cohort as what they have. Why do you move to a retirement village? If you live on an acre or 4,000 square metres in Donvale and you're 65, it's too big, you can't look after it, so they're looking for a lifestyle. Normally, a lot of the time they've had a security issue. So there's a break-in or something's happened to their house, they don't feel comfortable living in their house anymore. They want to live in a gated community that's controlled, so people don't come and go. There's normally a security issue. A lot of the time it's companionship, so with their families, young kids, it's always active, but when the kids move away and the area around, a whole lot of people have moved out, they become lonely. So people say, I'll move in with my friends. The best marketing that you ever have for retirement villages is at the local bowling club or RSL, because people will reside there and they'll say, we're doing this, down in the community areas, and the people will say, I want to be part of that. I want to be active. I don't want to be aged and die quickly. I want to be active, so I want to form part of this community. So the biggest marketing is the residents that are in there, in the communities that they're activated in. And at the end of the day, one of the key things is they want to be near the children. So we've said is that if you've got a house in Camberwell, etc., and your kids live out in Berwick, people will say, why are you moving from Mount Waverley to Berwick? The reason being is they want to be near the kids and the grandchildren. So you have a whole lot of people moving out of the inner demographic. In an older house, it's on a big block of land. In Doncaster, it's worth $1 or $2 million, and they'll move out near where the kids are. So a lot of retirement village operators really target where the second home buyer market is, out at Berwick, Cranbourne and all those sort of areas, because that's where their kids live, and they'll move out within proximity to them. So they'll say, why would I move from, Glen Waverley or Mount Waverley out to Pakenham? Because they can sell their house for $2 million, they can actually buy a brand new retirement village unit that's got everything they want, bells, whistles, air conditioning, all that sort of stuff for probably $1 million. So they've got $1 million in the pocket and they're within 10 or 15 minutes of their kids. The other thing is that, there's cultural and isolation. Usually if one of the occupants dies or has health issues, usually the mother or the husband don't want to live by themselves in a big mansion that they, are concerned about their security at night. So they'll actually go into a retirement village, they'll have companionship type thing in the retirement village and won't feel isolated. So it's a quality of life issue. How do residents select a retirement village? Affordability, tenure, reputation, all of those sort of things, won't dwell on them. But also what's there. So a lot of the time it's not about monuments and architects defining, what's going to buy. It's about people's perception. So if you walk into a retirement village and people are happy and they're, welcoming and they're bowling and they're happy, people will say, I don't worry about what the buildings look like. It's a right atmosphere and that I want to feel part of versus being isolated. So a lot about this is about, how people market and what the interaction and the time that they spent, marketing and keeping facilities. Who are the major players? Big players, if you're going to be in the property game and you want to work for the private sector, who's in it? Stockland, Avio / Brookfield, Lendlease. So you can see that they control about, Stockland's about 2 or 3% of the market, and the others make up about 97% of the smaller. So it's very disaggregated, and there's a big roll-up of retirement villages. So as I said before, barriers to entry are very low. If you've got the land, you can build it, because you don't need licenses, etc. So you can actually build it and target the cohort that you want. But you can see very, very fragmented. As I said, the key issue about a retirement village, the valuation sits into 3 components: property business, operations and rollover. So the property business is you build these things. Can someone give me a ballpark of how much it costs to build a 3-bedroom unit in Donvale or Doncaster for one of these things? Just broadly, how much do you think it would cost you to build one of these?
350 grand.
350 grand. How much do you reckon sell them for? 500-600 grand. So you're making a 20 to 25% on development. Good business, bad business? pretty good business. Then what's called is the weekly service fee. So when you move into a retirement village, you might pay 500 grand to move in, then you might pay $100 a week to cover the gardener and the community facilities. At best, that breaks even. You never make any money. If it makes any money, it's got to go into a sinking fund. And the final equation of where everyone's after is what's called a deferred management fee. Does anyone understand what a deferred management fee means? Every time a person moves out, you clip the ticket for about 30% of the value. So as an example that we used before, a unit's worth 500,000. Assuming that there's no capital growth in that unit and they move out in 10 years, the operator gets $150,000 because what it is 3% per annum for 10 years. So the operator has made 150, 200 grand on when he sold the project originally. He hasn't got any operating expenses and he clips the ticket for about 150 grand when the person moves out. So the estate of the family, in my example, it's worth 500,000. The operator gets 150,000 and the estate gets 350,000. You happy about that? You've paid nothing for it, and every time a person rolls over, you're getting 30% of the value. Broadly, how long do you reckon people live in a retirement village? 7 years. 7? Any better than that? 10. So I'll pluck some figures. I've got a retirement village that's 150 units in size. 10% being my average length of stay is 10 years, roll over every year, so I'm going to have 15 rollovers a year. In the example that I used, every time a resident rolls over, I get 150 grand. I'm making $2.25 million a year for perpetuity at no cost. Who likes that sort of investment? Not bad. So you can see why the Lend Leases and all those people want to get into the market.
Is the 30% standard, like, is that always the same, or does it change?
It changes, so normally it's 3% per annum for a maximum of 10 years. So if I'm in there, and what the market has been doing, what the market's been doing is, let's make it 5% per annum to a maximum of 6 years. So people that go into a retirement village never think they're going to die and they're going to be there for 20 years. They don't think about the deferred management fee, but in essence, they normally move in between 78 and 82. So a maximum they're going to be in is there for 12 years. If they roll over earlier, you make a mozza. So what people are doing is saying, understand if you're going to stay there for 20 years, I'm only going to charge you 30%, but it's 5% per annum for a maximum of 6 years. So if they roll over within 6 years, they get 30%. Are you happy or sad? You're extremely happy. You're getting your 30% 6 years more earlier than what you otherwise. So that's where people are changing that DMF model, but you can't push it too much because then you have the frontline news of like the 7:30 report on AVO, of these people paying 100 grand or 300 grand and walking out 10 years later with 30. Unhappy people. So that's where it's got to be affordable. One of the reasons why the DMF historically has been at 3% per annum. What do you think people or the market's got away with 3% per annum historically? Inflation. Your parents go in, 500 grand. They go out 10 years later. The average compound growth of residential might be 6% or 4%. As long as your parents walk out with more than what they've paid, they don't care. So 10 years later, they paid 500 grand, they walk out with 510. Happy campers. Because they don't look at the time value of money. So if the compound growth rate is 4% and you're clipping the ticket by 3, They don't know about that because they'll say, you know, all of this amenity, all this service, but you actually make a lot of money. Again, I don't know how many of you people will go into valuations. It's an absolute disaster if you get valuation instructions to say, can you make sure that you assume that the operations are break even? Because they make a loss, because if there's one resident in there or 5, the community bus has got to be there, the hairdresser's got to be there, everyone's got to be there, all your entourage, because you're selling quality of lifestyle. And people only want to pay $100 a week. If you ramp up the $100 a week, not happy campers. So you've got to make sure if you're doing any feasibility models that you factor in the operational losses until the market reaches about 70% occupancy. Otherwise, if you don't do that, you'll be overestimating what the market value is. So you make a development profit, but normally these things, when you build them, normally they're about 150 units large. The community centres normally cost between $6 and $10 million. It's not an outhouse or a men's shed. These community centres are significant infrastructures that the retirement village occupants will occupy, and they're worth nothing. So yes, the development of the unit will cost you $350,000, but when you allocate the other infrastructure, like the bowling green, the swimming pool, the community centre, that might cost another 200 grand per unit to build that infrastructure. Because if you don't have that infrastructure solely for their use, they won't buy in there. Just a couple of things, won't dwell on a number of these slides. Flat land. Old people don't like walking up hills. Don't like stairs. Single story, unless it's got a lift. Old people that are in wheelchairs, have ailments, no stairs. Normally 120 to 150 units is what you've got to do to allocate your cost of your infrastructure, and you've just got to make sure that all of that infrastructure is there. Otherwise it's not a retirement village. If you think it's going to be small scale, you won't be able to allocate the infrastructure over. When you're doing a vacant block of land that's got a permit, what you need to do is exactly what you do for a conventional subdivision. So you do a hypothetical development. In this one that I've got as an example is 240 units. Normally the selling expenses, it's high pressure sales. So sales in a residential development probably cost you 1.5%. In retirement it's about 3%. In this example I've used 350,000 as an average unit value, and what I've said is that my finance cost is 7.5% and my construction costs. So again, in the property business, I'm just going down the right hand side of saying 240 units at 350,000 is 84 million. Selling costs are $2.5 million, less profit and risk construction, comes out with my residual of $5 million. So it's like you're doing a unit development, everything like that. But again, you've got to factor in an operating loss for it, but normally you'll make about a 20% return on your development. Rollover. So what people do generally is that if a unit without a deferred management fee is worth 500,000, normally they pay 20% less, because they've got to pay the deferred management fee at the end. Hypothetically, what they'll do is pay 490 in a retirement village because they're paying 30% of the outgoing amount. And again, I won't go through detail, is that when you go into a retirement village, you pay the upfront cost, a weekly service fee, and the DMF when you move out. And that's what it does, it maintains it. Who, in valuing the deferred management fee, what do you think the key variables are to work out what your cash flow looks like? Discount rate's one. When they're going to leave. You've got a lady that's 78 that's moved in. What do you think will define when she'll move out? what reference point would you have to find out when you think she'll move out? Life tables. So what in the financial model you've got to do is model every resident. So you've got to, in the models that we do, you've got to look at what the probability analysis of the person is. So if you say my average length of stay is 12 years, as an example, how do I weight the probability analysis versus their age? So if they move in at 65 versus 75 versus what sex they are, because females will live longer. So what you've got to do is each resident, you've got to know how long they've been in their village, if they're male or female, and then you've got to do a probability analysis based on your market research to see when they're going to roll over. So as an example, I open a brand new retirement village and sell 100 units, and I open it day one. In year 12, would you expect 100 residents to roll over in your cash flow? No. Why? They're going to be a different age moving in. They're going to, whether they're male or female, so you have to do a probability analysis of every resident to find out what the aggregate cash flow is. So that's where this is very complex, but when you've done a lot of them, you know what the cash flow is going to look like by looking at the rollover profiles. So we've got a model that goes through probability analysis, so we can weight it higher to the age of the resident or how long they've been in. As I said before, is that the rollover is defined by the age, their price, and the margin. I won't go into the complexities of it. Historically, it used to be 30% of the outgoing price. What now people are doing is saying, we're going to take 20% of the ingoing price and 100% of the capital gain. So when your mum and dad goes in there, you know exactly what you're paying out, and I'm going to take all the risk on the capital gain. So now people like Ryman, etc. are saying, you've got certainty when you move in, you know 20% is going to be payable, and they're making a mozza. Because these things cost between 20 and 50,000 to refurbish and 100% of the capital gain. So as an example that I used before, I buy in at 500,000, I compound at 4%, after 10 years it's worth 700 grand. I'll use this example. My DMF is 2.5% for a maximum of 10 years, and I'm going to take 50% of the capital gain. This person goes in at 100 grand. In today's market, it's probably 500 grand. They're in there for 8 years, and they sell. The market value of that unit in 8 years' time is worth 200,000. The operator's entitlement there is 2.5% of 8 years, so I take 20% of the ingoing price plus the capital gain being 50%. I'm, as the operator, I walk out with 70,000 every time a resident rolls over in this example. The estate of the family gets 130. They're happy because they've only paid 100 grand. They're walking out with 130, but I'm taking 70 grand. That's a lot of money, and in the example that I used in the current market, at something worth 500 grand, I'm working out with 150 every time a resident moves out, and assuming that I've got a village of 150 units, I'm making $2 million at no cost. Every year, without fail.
But isn't the fee, what they're paying for, is for the management of the property and the operational costs?
But your weekly service fee covers that. So at best, you've got 1 or 2 people. Because people are active and all that, so the pool operator, you don't need all these people running around, like nurses, etc. You've got 1 or 2 people, and your weekly service fee covers that. So valuation, what we do is you've got to have complex models. We do a 25-year cash flow. We do an analysis, because what you normally do is the average length of stay is between 10 and 12 years. So you want to pick 2 rollovers in your cash flow. And what you've got to do is do a modelling on every resident. to say, right, based on the resident data, because some villages might have 20 or 30 different contract types. So you've got to model each contract type, and then when it rolls over, it goes to your standard contract type. So with the evolution of time, you've got to model each one of them. And it's very easy, because once you've got your standard templates, you just code it to say this is contract A, B, C, D, and then when it rolls over, it goes to a standard contract. So it's pretty easy to do. But again, there's refurbishment costs and all that. So very complex, why you get the big fees for it. And if you're doing it, you make sure you've got to understand each input and what impact it actually has and who's taking the responsibility of it. Won't again dwell through these. Average growth rates for retirement villages are roughly between 2.36 and 3.5%. Average length of stay is between 10 and 12 years, so whoever guessed 10 and 12 years, right on the button. Discount rates, you're making about 12.5 to 14% IRRs, good or bad? Who wants to get a 13% IRR for immature DMFs? Pretty good, I would have thought. Retail's probably what, 6 or 7? So this sector will give you a double yield and return. So your Lend Leases and Mr. Stockland and all those people, that's a good return for them. But these things cost a lot of money. When the person moves out, you've got to change the carpet, the blinds and all that sort of stuff. If it's 20 years old and they've got, old bathrooms and kitchens, they've got to be demolished. So it's got to be new each time that you actually sell it. If it's run down, it's not very good. A couple of other things, won't sort of dwell too much on them. You don't get a title. All of these you get a right to occupy, which is called a loan licence. Why do people pay that? You don't pay stamp duty on it. So you get the right to occupy, but there's no stamp duty. So when you're actually doing it, you're overcoming that, and then there's GST implications on it as well. Again, the residential market immensely affects the retirement village market. If you can't sell your house, you can't buy a retirement village unit. Because normally people move out of their house and go in. If your residential values get smashed, you'll pay less for your retirement village unit. So one of the key variables that you've got to look at is what is the residential market doing in the location and state that you're doing. Because if people aren't selling and they can't afford a retirement village, they won't buy it. This is an example of one village of our model that says Unit 2. The person moved in 2007 on contract type 8, so they're 84.13 years old. We think that they're going to roll over in 5.79 years. And that just comes from actuarial and life tables. So you can see to the detail of what it is. And in this example, what I've done is that I'm just going to put my weightings to the time that they've been in the village versus their age. So that's where you've got to go through, and it mathematically works out all of the time and average length of stay and that. So you can see there, time expected to be, and I'll get a cash flow out of that. And you can track people to like very close of what that rollover profile is going to be. They're going to die and move out. So it's not like you're not going to get the DMF, it's just a matter of time. And that's why I've got a distribution that we put it over 2 years. So we say, yeah, we might have it wrong, but it's going to be within a 2-year period so that we actually understand what that cash flow looks like. So that's what our cash flow looks like. Year 1, I'm making 52,000. Year 2, because I only got one rollover. Year 2, I've got 136 grand. Year 3, I've got 4 rollovers. And I must have built this a while ago. So in year 4, I'm getting 7 rollovers. So you can see there in the cash flow that my cash flow is not like a rental stream. It's up and down based on the profile of the residents that I've got. So you've got to look at the cash flow to see what the cash flow is going to look like, and then you'll come up with the evaluation. So in the example here, the cash flow is worth $7.3 million. Sold all the units, that's just what the cash flow is worth. So all your development profit's gone, and I get that for perpetuity. So that'll go for 99 years. Care, won't sort of dwell on what the care component is, but at best it'll break even. Sales, You can see all the sales, again, for your own reference. Normally, what a DMF is worth is about 20% of what the gross asset value is. So if all the units in the retirement village are worth 200 million, your DMF's worth 40 million, broadly. And you can see what the discount rates and all those are, so I won't bore you with all the details. Important issues. Understand what you're valuing. Make sure that you've got the right model. If you're not competent of doing it, don't ever give advice on what the deferred management fee is, because if you get it wrong and you don't understand the cash flows, you'll be incorrectly portraying to your client that you'll be making money that you're never going to make. And it's about security, care, it's not about bricks and mortar. Nursing homes. Who's been in a nursing home? You're gone. It's like a hospital. You don't move out of your bed, very rarely. You've got to have 24-hour care. You've got nurses running around everywhere. You've got to get fed, you've got to get bathed. Government funds you, government regulate it. It looks like that. An institutional home. Aged care facilities now are very complex, so the average length of stay that you've got in a nursing home is 18 months and you're dead. Very specific, that they've got dementia wards, they've got palliative care. You can't mix cohorts of residents that are violent, that have dementia, with ageing population. One of the examples that we recently have seen on the news is there was a 2-bed ward. There was a dementia patient next to a ageing resident, that was in there. Smashed a chair over him. Not a good. Government took the funding away. So what actually happens is the government define the quality of care you get, so they'll grade you if you need dementia, and you've got to be in a dementia-specific ward. Who's been in a dementia-specific ward? What does it look like? Grim. No beds, you're laying on mats on the floor because they'll smash, they fall off. They've got to be colour-coded, they've got to be 24/7. The nurse ratios are through the roof. They hurt themselves. Don't know where they are. So it is very, very intensive care, and the government pay for it. But there's specific areas. You can't integrate them with normal aged care residents. And as I said, people are moving into these facilities with 18 months to go in their life. They're stuffed. So that's where the nursing, the quality of care, the food and all that sort of stuff, they have dietitians, they have doctors, everyone looking after their care plans to make sure that they're looked after appropriately and have dignity in their last stage of their life. Has anyone had any experience in a nursing home of when a family member goes in? What actually happens now is what's called a bond. So what happens is if a family member moves in, and this is generally without the not-for-profits, they'll charge a accommodation bond. Some of these bonds might be up to $1 million. As an example, I'll use is $500,000. So in most of the nursing homes around Melbourne, you give an accommodation bond, which is an interest-free loan, to the operator until the person moves out. So you'll give them $500,000 going in. And when your mother or father dies, they'll give you the $500,000 back, and a new resident comes in and pays $500,000. Let me use an example. I've got 100 beds in Doncaster. Say I can bond 80% of the beds. 80 beds. I charge $500,000 on average as a bond, so I'm sitting on a bond pool of $40 million. How much do you reckon these things cost to build? Just broadly. 250, say. It's cost me $30 million to build this, including the land. And I've got a bond pool of $40 million. Am I happy or am I sad? Very happy. Then I've got my operation margin. So how much am I making a bed? 10 to 15 grand, say it's 10. For 100 beds, I'm making $1 million operating profit and I've got no debt. Pretty happy person. Is there many businesses who can do that? So that's why you've got a whole lot of roll-ups, but if you get the quality of care and the government come in and say you've given it inappropriate care, they can close your facility and you've got to pay all the bonds back. So if you spent the money and you haven't got it, a lot of trouble. And what the government is doing is lifting the bar, and the Royal Commission is about data analytics. They want care, systems, processes before they hand money over.
So the operators, do they then invest that money that they've been given, say that, for example, the 30 or the 40 mil?
Yeah, so what they've got to do is there's prudential requirements. So as long as it's used for aged care facilities, so then it bankrolls into the next one. So companies like Arcare have got 4,000 beds now. What they did is started with 2 or 3 nursing homes, and as they got the bonds, it bankrolled the next one, which bankrolled the next one. Now they've got 40 facilities around Australia. So it's just bankrolled it the whole time because the banks weren't funding it, so it's a user pay, but they've got a liability that if a fire went through their facility or they got a sanction, they have to pay all of those bonds back. But they don't have to hold them in a bank account. They've got to keep 10 or 20% as a liquidity line. But as long as you use it for aged care, you can keep reinvesting in the market. So where you see this at the moment is that you've got some big institutions. So you've got 3 listed players, Japara, Estia and Regis. They institutionalised the market 4 or 5 years ago. Big not-for-profits, Blue Care, Benetas, Catholic Homes, Bapcare, Anglicare, they're really looking after the low socio-economic cohort or concessional residents. So they're doing it for the well-being of their communities. But what you're finding now is that there's been a major roll-up of the facilities. So when you're talking about the systems and processes that these operators have to put in place, you need about 2,000 to 3,000 beds to make a lot of money. The reason being is the government want your care plans, system plans, personal improvement plans. They want head office. They want every bell and whistle because they're giving you $200 a day. So it is a big corporate, and generally the corporate head office costs between 5,000 and 10,000 a bed to provide. So if I've got 5,000 beds, normally head office will cost me about 15 million bucks. So it's big, it's corporatised, and that's why you've got the small operators that are getting out of the market. Of saying, for us to put the systems, the accountants, the processes, the data analytics of what the government's going to want in the future, I can't afford it as a sole operator. So what the government's doing is forcing all of the small operators out, and they're aggregating, similar to what happened to the hospital market 10 or 15 years ago. So there's a bit of carnage in the market where people are buying others out because of the Royal Commission, and you'll find that you'll have groups, potentially like a Brookfield, that have bought Healthscope and bought Avio that are buying into the aged care market. So you'll have brands like Brookfield, Regis, Japara, that'll be multinational companies that'll have 5,000 and 10,000 beds in the future, because each year the government's lifting the bar for you to comply. So you'll invest. Ageing population, demographics are through the roof. So demand's really going to be there. As I said, again, when you're valuing an aged care or a nursing home, there's 3 components or 2 components. You can value the facility as a going concern. That's a walk-in, walk-out basis. And now what's happening in the market is property trusts are buying into the asset and keeping the operations to a third party. So you've got to understand what you're valuing. So are you valuing it as a going concern, or are you only valuing the land and buildings? Or are you valuing the business? Be clear of what you're valuing, because the valuation methodology changes accordingly. Won't dwell on this, you'll read through all the notes. What you've got to do is work out in the value as a going concern of what the operating cash flow is. So you've got to have all your benchmark material of saying, is a normal operator going to make 10 to 15 grand a bed, and then you capitalise it. And with the public markets being with Regis, Japara and SDR, you can actually look at their financial reports to say what a normal operator would do. As I said, the government funds you, you should be 95% occupied. This whole business is about cost, rosters, staff. And everyone's got it down packed of exactly what margin you make. So you're making about 10 to 12,000 or 15,000 a bed. So depending on what it is. A lot of the ones we worked into a nursing home 10 or 15 years ago of shared wards, gone. Most of them want private rooms, private en-suites. So if you walk through a facility and there's 4 beds in a ward with a shared en-suite, ain't going to last very long. So they've got to be new, so they have an economic life, so they've got to recycle them a fair bit of the time. Capitalisation rates. Because it's a business, normally the cap rate will be about 10 to 12%, because you're operating a business. That includes real estate. So it's not like an office building that you can just stand back. This is very hands-on. You're dealing with a lot of staff and a lot of families and all that sort of stuff. So the cap rate's about 10 to 12%. Going concern benchmarks. As I said here, this is widgets. If you have a look at the net operating margin, Estia makes 16.4%, Japara makes 10.9%, and Regis make 19.5%. But when you actually have a look at the revenue per occupied government, the government pay Mr. Estia per resident $197.30. They pay Japara $198.70, and they pay Regis $198. So you can see within a dollar, they pay per resident roughly the same. Their occupancy is roughly the same. So it's about the staff and the wages. And if you get that right, it just drops to the bottom line. So you can see where that benchmark is, that Japara is making less because of their facilities, but Mr. Estia is $14,880 per bed, and Mr. Regis is $17,000. The reason why Mr. Regis makes more, he's got better quality facilities, so he can charge more. So when you're benchmarking your operating performance, you've got to go through and work out exactly what it is. So you can see all the expenditures, the margins and all that, which I've given to you. Valuation. I've got 100 beds, I think this example is. I'm making an operating profit of about $1.3 million. So my gross revenue is 7.4 mil. My operating expenses are 6 mil. I'm making an EBITDA of $1.3 million. Say it's 100 beds, I'm making about 13,000 a bed. Capitalise it at 15%. So my value of my business is roughly $9.3 million. $9.3 million comes through. This is a big issue. That's what's called a core value. Then I've got my bond pool. The bond pool transfers over. If I add the bond pool, my gross value for this is 37 million. So you've got to be clear of what you're valuing, because the core value assumes that you take on the bond liability as the purchaser. So I'll hand a cheque over of $9.3 million and I'll take a liability of $28 million. People that don't understand the industry will get that confused with a $37 million. So if you report the wrong figure to the bank and the bank lands on the 9 rather than the 38, make sure your PI insurance is covered. Because if you assume and hand over a cheque of 37 million and take on the bond liability of 28 million, 50, you've paid 65, not 37. So you've got to be clear about who's liable for the bonds. Key thing of understand where the bonds are. Because assuming that I paid 37 and I assume that I took the 28, which is 65, and there was a fire that went through the facility, I probably only could sell it for $10 or $20 million. So very bad occurrence. So you've just got to understand where the bonds are. The benchmarks are for a freehold. Freeholds are really easy to value. You're not taking any operation expense. Normally the rents are about $200 per bed per week, and you capitalise it at 7%. Easy, 130 to 150,000 a bed for the freehold only. And a whole lot of property trusts are trying to get into this market, such as Norwest, Vital, ISPT, because they're getting an annual return of 7% in a growing market, and they're not worried about risk. Why don't the property trusts and a lot of the institutions want to take operational risk? If you looked at the 7:30 report and the AMP was on the front page of the paper, getting sanctions and inappropriate care, is that a good or a bad news story? Disaster. So that's why a lot of people will take property risk, but not operational risk, because if it goes bad, they don't want to tarnish their brands. So that's why Mr. Stockland and Mr. Lendlease have never got into aged care, because they don't want that brand risk. So as I said before, the bar is getting higher and higher. You do something wrong to a resident of, if there's inappropriate care, and you're on the front page of the paper, the brand and reputation risk to these big institutions, they would never take. So that's why some of them, and then the Japara and Regis, will certainly go through and take that risk. As an example, I'll just use an example here, is for a freehold only, if my rental per annum is $10,000 per annum, and I've got 120 beds, that's $1.2 million a year, and if I capitalise it at 7%, it's roughly $140,000. So the freehold is very easy to value. Market rent, capitalised, will give the freehold value around 140 grand a bed. The business is really difficult, because what you've got to do is that the businesses and the bed licences sell. So without a licence, you can't do anything. And these licences cost about 75 grand to buy. So unless someone's selling them, you can't operate an aged care facility, because with the licence comes the government funding. Aged care market, won't dwell on it. As I said, the bar's getting higher. 4 or 5 years ago, you had 1,000 to 1,500 beds was relevant in the market. Now you need 3,000 because of the digital and all that sort of stuff of requiring. IPOs of the market have been smashed. So a number of government regulations, when they announce things to the stock market about care and funding, it goes straight to the share price of some of the big operators. So when they announced the Royal Commission into aged care, some of their IPOs or some of their share values went down 20 to 30% overnight.
Are you seeing a lot of, because this space used to have mum and dad operators, are they decreasing more?
Gone. As I said, the government now want a care plan for every resident. They want data analytics, they want head office, they want... One of the ones I recently sold was up at the Haven, which is in Wagga Wagga. Community-based organisation that had been there for 70 years. On the board was the key lawyer, key accountant, key car salesman in town. What they said is that they had an unannounced audit from the department saying, "Where's your wound management policy and procedure manual?" They said, "What? We operate one facility." And they said, "Unless you've got that, we're going to sanction you, and you as directors have a legal liability." So they got out to saying, we as directors can't afford to take this liability because we don't have 50 manuals, quality and procedure people, staff training people, all of these things. So the bar's getting lifted and lifted. So that's why you've got some of the bigger operators getting bigger, because they've got those systems and processes of what the government and the regulatory authorities need. One of the things that you see is the Royal Commission is really going in. And when you have a look at it, of saying, they're getting inappropriate food. Normally there's a dietitian on staff, and a lot of the aged care residents with dementia, etc., can't swallow. So you're going to give them porterhouse steak? No. They're on supplements and that is given by the doctor. Of saying, you know, they've got to take this Sustagen and all that sort of stuff, you know, because they might only have weeks to live. And they can't actually, you know, digest food. So there's a whole lot of innuendo on that some's valid and some's not valid, because it's the dietitians and the doctors that define the quality of care, medication. It's not the nurses that are floating around the floors. It's all professional people. So it is very, very regulated and very contentious and top of mind for people. And that's why the government, through this Royal Commission, will get it right. But they'll lift the bar and they'll have to fund a lot more money in it, because otherwise people will get out because the bar's becoming too high for a number of the operators.
So are they shutting down or are they transacting?
Transacting. Because a lot of not-for-profits are saying, we've got to get bigger or we've got to get out. So you've got a whole lot of not-for-profits that are aggressors. They say, we actually want to roll up these portfolios, like a Mequa Care, bought Vincent Care, that, you know, was 6 facilities. So they're wanting to get bigger. And then some of the other people have put their hands in the air saying, we've got a single facility, we've got no balance sheet, we've had it for 50 years, we can't develop it, you know, single rooms, en suites, we're non-compliant, where to get out? Again, won't dwell, give you all the sales information. All the sales information, broadly these things sell for between 250 to 300,000 a bed gross, including bonds. So you can see there on the gross, so we actually, you know, define the value of net and gross, so you can actually see all the sale prices, and the shitty ones are the ones that sell at a lower price. So I'll just, that's all the slides I've got, but just a couple of things is that don't turn your back on this industry. If you're going to be a property valuer, an investor, working for Stockland Lendlease, you're going to come across this, because it's getting bigger. But make sure that you actually talk to people that are conversant with it, because if you're not interpreting the data very well, or you don't have the systems and structure to actually determine value, don't touch it. So probably, you know, once every 3 or 4 months I get an email across my desk that we're suing someone. So the lawyers will ring me and say, right, why was this person negligent? And they've missed key things, or they've said, oh, I'm actually going to assume for a retirement village, all my residents are going to roll over in 5 years. So I've got this huge DMF that just bangs in, you know, year 5. And you know it's wrong, because the average age of the residents are in there is 65, so you know they're going to be in there for at least 15 years. So people will be directed to give various assumptions on cash flows, and you've got to stand back in a reality check and say, are those cash flows correct based on your experience? And if you don't have the experience to reflect on, is it coming up with a reasonable benchmark, because people will say it's worth $100 million when it's worth 20, make sure that you've got those benchmarks to define value and ensure of what you're actually valuing is correct. So I'm asking you a DMF, development profit, all these sort of things. And as I said, it is very complex, but if you want to make money, a whole lot of people are charging into this industry and really getting the IP and all that sort of stuff to ensure that they go in appropriately, because it's about care, security, lifestyle. It's not bricks and mortar. If you go in with the perception that it's bricks and mortar, you'll go broke very badly, and it'll turn out very badly for you. So is there any questions of...
So I got a couple. One regarding the retirement villages and one for the aged care. For the retirement village, you are considering the development project, but you said that with the infrastructure added, then my understanding that development profit could even be like negative.
No, it'll be always 20%. So what the guys do is, when they go in, is that unit will cost 250. Normally your infrastructure will be about 150, so it's 400 grand. Normally you'll sell between 500 and 600 grand. So you know, with roads and infrastructure, you're going to make a 20% return on cost, roughly.
And what do you think with the rise of the BTR and the less home ownership in the millennial? Because all this business model is based on the fact that they own property. What if they don't own property?
Yeah, it's a really good question, because when I talked about bonds, what it is about choice. So, as an example, if your mum was going into a nursing home and the bond was $500,000, but you had a choice to say you can either pay 500,000 or you can pay 250,000, and the bit that you don't pay, we're going to charge you interest of 5%. What would you do?
If I had it, I would give the money, of course.
So would you give the 500 or the 250?
500.
Why?
Because I don't want to pay the interest.
As an example, that's what people have choice at the moment, and what people are doing are driven by their family members. So assume that your parents have got their money in superannuation that is returning 8% per annum. What would you do? Leave your money in super because you're getting 8% and you're only paying them 5%. So at the moment, people are giving the money because they're saying, who's got money, who's got a term deposit, put your hand up. How much interest are you getting? 1.8. So you'd actually pay the full amount because he's only getting 1.8. They're going to charge you 5. So it's everyone's circumstances are different. The other thing of the question is, are you going to sell the family home? A lot of kids won't sell the real estate. So I'll say it's been in our family for generations. We'll actually pay, in the example of 500, we're going to give you no bond, but we're going to give you 25 grand a year, being 5% on the 500,000, because we're going to keep the family home. You're not touching it. So that's where there's a whole lot of decisions, and exactly as you say, wealth has got to be held somewhere. But people in government are giving flexibility to meet your individual circumstances or your families, so the operator really doesn't care because he's still getting his money at the end of the day. So as an example, your parents move in, they've only paid 250,000 versus 500,000. When they move out after 2 years, they're dead. They'll only give you 200 grand. They've kept the 25 grand, which is the interest that you've actually accrued on the balance you didn't pay. Kids happy, sad? I don't care. So the financial instruments are really going up, and that's where you've got to understand, are you paying a bond or a part bond or a combination? It really affects it. But you guys will be making the decisions. You'll have your little calculators out. You'll be saying, I'm not selling mum's house. I'm going to move in, renovate, bring the whole family in, and we'll make the difference. Any other questions?
So for the retirement village, it says they don't have to tire of the property. So when they move out, how they're going to transact to the next occupants?
So what it is a loan licence. So you don't pay stamp duty on it, so you'll have a right to occupy. And when they move out, the money goes back to the operator, and then he enters into another loan licence or a right to occupy for their life.
So they're not selling the open market, they're just...
Never selling the open market. So the other thing, which I probably didn't mention, no real estate agents ever get involved in these because they don't understand the DMF, and if they miscommunicate the DMF, so the person on site is normally 60 years of age, male or female, and they hit the heartstrings of the residents. They're not 25-year-olds with blue suits, shiny shoes, one of those black bags, that's pretty spivvy and all that. They don't sell the age to retirement groups. Very older people, very low key, and really hit the heartstrings about the safety, the quality, all that, and they have to explain, so that normally 9 times out of 10, the agents or the person selling the unit will actually work for the owner, and normally they get reimbursed for it, but they're very old people and they're not spiffy and associated with real estate.
But is the like occupants going to get the access price when the sale is realized, or what if there's no occupants, like they just can't get
If they can't sell, normally you don't pay it back. So, but what it is there's an alignment of interest. So the owner only gets his DMF once a unit's sold, and because of the ageing population, normally there's a waiting list. So if you've got a good retirement village, you've got 10 people that want to move in. So as soon as a three bedroom with an ensuite and 2 garages come up, it's sold within the next day. They refurbish it, and then they move in. And the reason why the operator wants to make sure that there's a waiting list, they get their cash fairly much straight away.
For the aged care facilities, with the increase in the regulation, which I understand coming from a good place to provide a better healthcare, but isn't it, don't you think, putting the market in a monopoly situation where there's no competition, and then like anti-competitive behavior engaged by these big guys? How do you think the state is going to limit that? So
Yeah, I think what they'll do is the government are broke. They want to reduce spending on aged care. I think it's about 3 or 4% of GDP and growing. So what they're going to do is introduce more of a user pay. So if your mum, dad can afford to be in a high-end Toorak nursing home or Camberwell nursing home that your mum gets her hair done every day, they'll actually get a user pay. So the government are introducing more and more user pay. So if you've got the resources, you're going to be paying for it. So it comes out of, the families or executors' wealth, because if you've got $5 million in the bank, the government's going to take most of that when your parents are in a nursing home, so the kids won't be getting much. So that's where the government's moving about that user pay. So if you want to differentiate and have, good quality wine instead of, $2 bottles of wine with your dinner and all that, you'll pay for it. Whereas you don't at the moment. Hello.
Okay. Highly complex topic, especially very good example of the specialized property. So we probably have 10 minutes break and come back to the slides.
I thought I changed it. Hey? Oh, yeah, that should have gone over. So I gave all the sales. Like, those pictures were really good, but it's quite interesting some of the aged care operators. With care, they're doing a lot of intervention.
I think